Warhammer 40K is a universe packed with gods, demons, primarchs, Khaines, warp entities, living saints, and horrors so far beyond mortal comprehension they barely quantify as characters at all. But out of all of them, who's actually the most powerful? Who sits at the very top of the 40K universe when we strip away bias, favoritism, nostalgia, and just look at power alone? I've seen a ton of most powerful 40K characters lists, and unfortunately, most of them either ignore codex statements, forget major feats, or skip scaling completely. But not here. Because today, we're ranking the top 15 most powerful beings in Warhammer 40K, going from weakest to strongest, using everything I can get my cow hooves on, including codex statements, black library excerpts, feats, supplement pages, and scaling implications to determine this insane verdict. To make this as fair as possible, every being on this list will be judged at their absolute peak. That means the Eldar gods during the war in heaven, the Khaine before they were shattered, or the Chaos gods at their greatest heights of power. It does not matter if they're currently dead, fragmented, imprisoned, shattered, or getting farmed by the Imperium. If at any point in 40K history they reached a higher level of power, that's the version we're ranking here. Shout out to the Discord Cow's Barnyard for helping out with this video. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. And don't forget to subscribe to a fallen cow. With that out of the way, you know what time it is. Let's jump straight into the goal. Say it with me, my beloved delicious herd. It's time to power scale. So fellas, before we get to the actual list, let's start with some honorable mentions. Since there are a few fellows who didn't make the cut, either because they have no feats or they have no feats or statements to suggest they're one of the top 15. To put it politely, there are a few fan favorites that straight up did not make the list. So I'm kind of throwing them here in the honorable mentions to make sure you guys don't break into my house and milk me while I'm sleeping. First is the Hive Mind. Oh yes, the Hive Mind did not make the list. Before you get your pitchforks, cows, let me explain myself. The Hive Mind is a vast, galaxy-spanning consciousness of the Tyranids. A single psychic superintelligence formed from trillions of bioforms acting as one will, guiding the Great Devourer across the stars. I've seen so many other YouTubers consider the Hive Mind one of the strongest beings in 40K, but I myself just don't see it. The Hive Mind literally has no feats whatsoever, at least against powerful enemies. Sure, it has the Shadow in the Warp, which broadcasts its presence to stop Psykers and block the Astronomicon, but even that Shadow can be overpowered and torn through, as seen in the devastation of Baal, when demons arrived to indirectly help the Blood Angels. I will admit though, the Hive Mind has some crazy statements that are just simply too hard to quantify. First, we see an Eldar Farseer describe it as larger than a god in Wraith Flight. She was so close now that she perceived the rigid topography of its mind. Larger than star systems, an entity bigger than a god. It contemplated thoughts as large as continents and spun plans more complex than worlds. It dreamed dreams that could not be fathomed. She felt small and afraid before it, but she did not let her fear cow her defiance. We also see a statement that the Hive Mind is one of the most powerful beings within the Skein. Tech watched as the immense minds of the two fleets reached out towards each other, groping blindly across the streams of probability. The components of the Hive Mind were spiritually puny, whisper-thin lines generated by bestial minds. But with so many twisted together, they made a mighty cable of fate, dwarfing all other threads on the Skein. For those who don't know, the Skein is a psychic metaphor and manifestation for all possible futures and pasts. It is viewed by Farseers as a tangled web of infinite threads where each thread represents a potential timeline or destiny. So for the Hive Mind to dwarf all other threads on the Skein is a quite impressive statement. And in that same book, the Hive Mind backs off from Khaine. The Avatar roared, hatred emanating from it so powerfully that the Hive Mind shrank back as dry grass shrinks back from fire. We could make the correlation that since this is simply an avatar of Khaine and the hive mind still shrank back from it, that would imply that the hive mind would not want to challenge Khaine, but once again, we don't really know.
I'm extremely confused. You're confused? I'm fucking confused, bro.
Me too.
On top of this, in that same book, Prince Uriel severely wounded the Tyranid hive mind during battle by slaying a swarm lord with the Spear of Twilight, a crone sword, which temporarily severed the connection of the Tyranid swarm to their just stolen consciousness. Now, the crone sword, of course, is one of the stronger weapons in 40k, so it's not a huge deal that it was damaged by it, but still that a mortal weapon can inflict such damage on it is kind of telling. This act caused the hive mind to feel, for the first time in ages, immense pain and psychological shock, effectively causing the Tyranid assault to collapse. There's even an instant where the hive mind short-circuited and died for a few moments from the Great Rift and devastation of Baal. So you can kind of see why I didn't put it on the list. There are a few statements that make the hive mind seem like it's very powerful, but its feats say otherwise. We don't know if these statements are correct, and they are often hedged with perhaps without formal confirmation. Due to these factors, I think the hive mind is still very powerful and adaptable, but the feats just don't suggest that it has the might to stand with the others on the actual top 15 list. So I apologize to all my bug boys out there, but the hive mind just doesn't cut it this time. I pinky promise I will do a video covering it in the future. You have my go word. The next honorable mention is also gonna hurt a lot of green feelings. Yep, that's right. Gork and Mork also did not make the list.
Oh man. Oh god. Oh man. Oh god. Oh man.
And my reasoning is quite similar to the Tyranid hive mind. For those who don't know, Gork and Mork are the twin orc deities. Brutal, cunning, and gunningly brutal. They are the green gods and the creators of the Wag, the divine embodiment of orc violence and belief. I know, Gork and Mork are very iconic, beloved by probably half the herd, and absolute legends in orc culture. But the thing is, their feats and codex statements don't quite stack up against the heavy hitters in the top 15, just like the hive mind. Simply put, there isn't a lot of concrete feats on these guys, and fans tend to overhype these gods and assume they are the strongest in 40k. However, while they existed at the beginning of time and are the main reason behind the orcs' Gestalt field, which alters reality through collective belief, we have to separate implication from demonstrated power. I will admit that they do have some serious statements, like this one from the Orc 7th edition codex. The orcs say that Gork and Mork are divine powerhouses, deities so strong that they are never truly defeated. They simply shrug off attacks of other gods with raucous laughter. But, and this is important, that is once again only a statement. The one actual feat we do have comes from the hunt. Gork and Mork go looking for a gigantic, squiggly beast and find it at the bottom of a huge cesspit. Also at the bottom of the cesspit is Nurgle, who has eaten all the snotlings. Gork and Mork clobber Nurgle so hard that he spews up all the snotlings who are still alive. Nurgle shrinks and becomes a squiggly beast. The snotling then turns the squig into a feast for Gork and Mork. This myth clearly represents the orc triumph over Nurgle. Some of you are probably looking at your screen with your jaw dropped and very confused why Gork and Mork are not on this list, even though this short story from Rogue Trader says they defeated Nurgle. Well, first off, this reads like a myth, because it's presented as one. And even if we assume it's literal, we know the manifestations of chaos powers are layered. These entities are so powerful, they can create sub-realities within the fabric of chaos itself. It is stated they can disperse their form, reshape the realms, or manifest smaller aspects of themselves. So if Gork and Mork really did defeat Nurgle, it may have very well been a smaller aspect of this stinky god, not Nurgle himself. This also appears to be very old lore that came out in the 90s. So I also don't know if we want to really take that as straight up canon. And I am not kidding, guys, this is all Gork and Mork have. This is exactly why they didn't make the list. I can't justify placing them in the top 15 when there's literally no concrete scaling chain, no codex declaration of supremacy, and no measurable feat putting them above entities we're about to rank. Are they powerful? Yes. Are they fundamental to the orcs? Absolutely. Are they top 15 in the entire Warhammer 40K setting? Well, based on evidence alone,
No.
and that definitely hurts my cohort to say. The third honorable mention on my list are the old ones, and the reason is pretty simple. They don't have any named characters. Not a single old one is individually named in canon, and it felt unfair to rank them because it would literally come down to old one number 1 versus that old one number 2. And this list is about ranking specific characters at their absolute peak. And with the old ones, we simply do not have individual characters to evaluate. That said, they are still undeniably absurdly powerful. In the 9th edition Necron Codex, they are described as the first to cross the stars and possessed a slow, cold-blooded wisdom, studying the stars and raising astrology and astronomy to an arcane science. Their understanding of the slow dance of the universe allowed them to manipulate alternate dimensions and allowed them to undertake great works of psychic engineering. They created the webway and multiple younger species like the Eldar, Quarks, and mankind. In addition to their psychic mastery, they also possessed mastery over Enuncia, which is described as, by the power of words alone, the fabric of reality could be changed, transformed, controlled, manipulated, reshaped. It was a fundamental device of creation. The Old Ones as a species are easily among the most powerful forces in the history of 40k. If you remember my previous video scaling them, I put them in the multiversal scale at the top of the setting. But once again, this list is ranking individual characters, not species. If there were a named Space Frog with even 1 or 2 concrete feats we could scale directly, I would absolutely consider putting them on the list. Too bad GW can't be bothered to write any new lore on them. Bummer, and because of that, I can't include them. Finally, the 4th character I have on the honorable mentions is Kegarak, the Laughing God. Kegarak is the Eldari god of laughter, trickery, deception, and creativity. He foresaw the birth of Slaanesh and ran away, hiding in the webway, to avoid being devoured. And the reason he made the honorable mentions is because his only real feat is tricking the outsider into consuming other Catan, which drove him insane. Not exactly a combat feat, to be honest, which is exactly why he's not on this list. Still, he is one of the few remaining gods still intact in 40k, so I felt like I should mention him. But due to the fact that we are ranking the top 15 most powerful beings in all of Warhammer 40k at their absolute peak across all of history, I can't justify placing him above entities who have direct codex supported feats of overwhelming force. Of course, there are other Eldar gods, minor gods, and powerful mortals who didn't make the list. But I think it was especially important that I put these 4, the High Mind, Gork and Mork, Kegarak, and the Old Ones before the top 15 begins. Because these characters are constantly thrown into the strongest 40k debates without enough scrutiny. With all of that out of the way, let's jump to number 15, where the confusion already begins. Starting our list at number 15, we have a 3-way deadlock. The Silent King, the Emperor in 30k, and God Emperor Horus. Now, you can say this is technically cheating, and I guess it is, but this is a weird spot. Because truly, it's hard to put one over the other. Let me start by explaining each of these 3 characters and their greatest feats and powers. Beginning with the Silent King. The Silent King, Zarek, possesses the most advanced Necron body ever created, meaning he has all the perks of being a Necron overlord, which is regeneration, insane durability, and advanced defense systems, but pushed to the absolute extreme. The Silent King's arsenal is truly terrifying. First, he sits on the Dais of Dominion. This Bone Daddy's chair is not only described as banishing the infernal energies of the warp, but also allows the Silent King to open invisible gateways into the webway. On top of that, the dais is also swathed in a temporal field that scatters the force of enemy attacks and dissipates them harmlessly around him. In addition to the Dais of Dominion, the Silent King also wields the Scepter of Eternal Glory, a staff imbued with another shard of the Burning One, which is said to send out searing beams of absolute destruction. I mean, the dude also wears a literal katana as a cloak, which might be the most pimp thing I've seen in my life. And of course, I've got to count that in power scaling. As for his feats, he has two major ones. First, from White Dwarf issue 480, when he one-shots a Warlord Titan with the Scepter of Eternal Glory. But even more significant is his feat from the 9th edition Necron Codex, describing Neandrazatha the Burning One and how a single etching shows the Silent King laying his spear into its molten heart. As I've discussed before, we don't know if that account is propaganda or if he truly 1v1'd a Catan. My interpretation of it is that he likely participated in dealing the final blow and probably tanked attacks from it in battle, but was likely aided by a Necron force. Still participating in defeating a full Catan is an absurdly significant feat. Then we have the Emperor and 30K. At his peak before being entombed on the Golden Throne, he is one of the most powerful psychers in the history of this setting. Some of his feats include forcing the entire Wordbearer's Legion, over 100,000 Space Marines, to kneel, with none able to resist. He could reach into thousands of minds at once, influence their thoughts and emotions, and mentally attack beings as powerful as Magnus the Red. He has demonstrated time-space manipulation, teleportation, dream projection, emotional domination, healing, machine repair, and is a perpetual, which means it's almost impossible for him to die. In the Master of Mankind, we see him set the webway aflame, and during his final battle in The End and the Death with Horus, he manipulates fate, reality, and moves through time and space itself. To summarize, he is pretty much operating on a level where reality bends around him. And then we come to God Emperor Horus Lupercal at his absolute peak, empowered by all 4 Chaos Gods. At this point, Horus is essentially an endless well of warp energy, and like the Emperor, he can manipulate fate, time, space, and reality. Horus is even shown to move faster than the speed of light, and can reach into other dimensions, like when we see him pluck Sanguinius out of the air. Horus Lupercal at this point is operating on a scale that dwarfs every single Primarch by a vast margin. However, on further analysis of their duel, the Emperor actually performs extremely well, and nearly wins at multiple points as they fight across dimensions. You behold them all, every facet of this psychic duel, occurring simultaneously. In some, like Majin Daro, where you spill his blood on the mound where that great city is yet to be built, or Kashar Yadik on Cadia, where you pin him to a Noctilith pylon with your talon, you are clearly winning. In others, like Garl's Scrapworld, where he herds a wog of Xenos brutes with his will to rend you limb from limb. Or Tiska, where a spark from his mind has set you on fire and he has the upper hand. So as you can see, these two, father and son, are literally fighting at multiple points throughout time and space at different planets or locations. Skill-wise, I would say the Emperor likely surpasses Horus, but Horus has something the Emperor does not: an effectively limitless supply of warp power from the Chaos Gods. The Emperor, on the other hand, must draw power either from the warp around him or from Horus himself, and if he absorbs too much, he risks becoming the Dark King, which, spoiler, we're gonna talk about later. So pretty much, the Emperor was kind of handicapped during his fight with Horus, and he is still outright winning at some points. So why are they all ranked here together at number 15? Well, because this is a genuine power scaling deadlock. The Silent King, seated upon his Dais of Dominion, could potentially nullify or suppress warp-based abilities, which is, you know, the Emperor and Horus's bread and butter. But it is impossible to definitely say that the Emperor's or Horus's power could be fully nullified by the Silent King's Chair of Doom. Meanwhile, both Horus and the Emperor can manipulate fate and transverse time, space, and dimensions during their battle, implying they could potentially bypass or outmaneuver Zarik's defenses. But yet again, the Silent King has most likely tanked Catan-level reality warping attacks, so perhaps he could endure even without the Dais backing him up. Each matchup leads to a circular scaling logic, Similar to Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru during Naruto, I couldn't justify placing one cleanly above the others. Nor could I leave any of them off the list. So the Silent King, the Emperor in 30K, and God Emperor Horus all share the number 15 spot. Isn't that insane? These characters don't even make the top 10. Now let's move on to number 14 before the Emperor fanboys kill me.
Leave me alone!
Coming in at number 14 is Nyadrazatha, the Burning One. Yes folks, we just went from Big E, his bald boy, and the Bone Daddy straight into a full Catan in one fell swoop. For those who don't know, the Burning One, Nyadrazatha, is one of the ancient and powerful star gods known as the Catan. And since we're going to be talking about the Catan quite a bit in this video, let's first discuss who they are and the powers they possess. The Catan are the gods of the physical world formed when the universe was born. As the lords of the material universe, they can warp reality and exist beyond comprehension and understanding. Because of this, they can truly never be destroyed. Even if their physical form is fully annihilated, they will continue to exist in some shape or form. Their powers consist of being fundamentally able to alter any form of reality, which includes the ability to create black holes and destroy entire star systems as seen in the 8th edition Necron Codex. Gorged on the life force of the Necron tier, the empowered Catan were near unstoppable and unleashed powers far beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole systems devoured by black holes, called into being by the reality warping powers of the star gods. This seems to have no clear upper limit, as they can also erase beings from existence. They are the masters of time and space, and are able to cast foes beyond time itself or outside the existence of time, as seen in that same codex, mutating the flow of causation and remolding the temporal stream of the time-space continuum. The Catan Shard casts its foe back into the darkness from before time was time. Yeah, you heard that right. He casts its foe back into the darkness before time was even a thing. Can he do that? Someone patch this guy. And that was only a shard, a sliver of what a full Catan can do. They're also shown to be able to manipulate the skein, meaning they can manipulate the past, present, and future, essentially the fundamentals of the universe and the boundary between the materium and the immaterium. Although they can't directly affect the warp, they can affect the boundary around it. It also appears they can create realities and galaxies with their powers as seen in Gods of Mars. They sought to connect all the universe with stepping stones, newly wrought galaxies they would build from the raw materials, scattered by the creation of space-time itself, further reinforced by the Nightbringer prologue. Galaxies had lived and died by their master's command, while stellar realms were extinguished for their pleasure and entire races brought into existence as their playthings. So to summarize, the Catan can manipulate reality with seemingly no limit and can birth and destroy life on a galactic scale. But the craziest thing about the Burning One and some of the Catan like him is that towards the end of the War in Heaven, they ascended their base states and became Ascendant Catan. What this essentially means is that the Catan were tricked into consuming other Catan. Yes, you heard that right, Catan cannibalism. By devouring their siblings, the remaining Catan concentrated the fundamental forces of the universe into fewer, more volatile vessels. This gave the few remaining Catan an even greater buff. The Catan were already star gods, but by eating others, they absorbed the specific elemental essence of their kin, as well as giving enhancements to their already god-level abilities. Didn't I tell you we were looking at the peak of each being? So we are not ranking the base Burning One, but the Ascendant Burning One, after consuming other Catan. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many the Burning One devoured, or how powerful they were, but logically we can assume that these other Catan were at least similar in power to the Burning One, of course weaker since he ate them.
Oh god, it's so good.
Now that we've talked about what a Catan is and what an Ascendant Catan is, let's discuss the Burning One's specific abilities and feats. Alongside its basic Catan powers, the Burning One can burn anything he touches. I mean, are you surprised about that? The Burning One reached out searing fingers, each one filled with the heat of a star. As the Catan's essence filled the ancient device, it burned away both Tyranid and human adornments. After he was sharded, he was able to land like a meteor and burn everything instantly. When the Catan shard struck the ruins, it sent a plum of molten rock hundreds of yards into the air, and a wave of fire rolled through the ruins, incinerating everything in its path. So once again, we see that the Burning One can burn everything, and this was as a shard. So logically, his powers should be a lot stronger than that in his full form, especially in his ascendant form. Now let's talk about his feats, and the Burning One doesn't have a ton to be honest, but there is still material to work with. First off, the Burning One was able to breach the webway for the first time during the War in Heaven. Which doesn't sound insane at first glance, but folks, it is. The webway is a labyrinth dimension existing between the Materium and the Warp. Its walls are reinforced with ancient psychic wards and technologies created by the Old Ones that are nearly impossible for modern races to replicate. And let me tell you folks, it's very hard to breach these wards. For example, Magnus the Red was only able to breach the webway because 1. He was a Primarch with immense psychic power, 2. He accepted a massive power boost from Tzeentch, and 3. He had sacrificed a large number of Psykers to fuel his ritual. Only then could he do it. So if the Burning One was able to do this, it's quite an impressive feat. Furthermore, the codex doesn't even stress that it was difficult for him to do it. His second feat, as we discussed earlier, is devouring his fellow Catan. Though of course, as we discussed earlier, we don't know how many or how powerful they were. So it's not really a quantifiable feat. Finally, we come to his third and final feat, which was when he was dealt a final blow by the Silent King, and then shattered and entombed in his chair and his staff. This would be the Burning One at the height of his power too. I'm going to show the full excerpt of their fight, just to clear up any confusion, but once again, as I discussed in the Silent King part of this video, this excerpt is definitely up to interpretation. The mirth of all cruel things was Neandrazatha, who was called the Burning One, immolating glee in the breath of the infinite pit. All things were its kindling, for its will was a searing that blackened the strands of eons. And its ravenous touch no thing of real, nor the echo realm might endure. It was the pyre of the labyrinth, the torch of the ziggurats lost, the reaping winds of Emperor Blight. How came that thing unto its end, no record speaks, but that a single etching upon a single wall, upon a single world, shows the silent lord himself laying the spear onto its molten heart. So as you can see, this is definitely up for interpretation, like a lot of things in 40K power scaling, which is kinda why I placed the Burning One right next to the Silent King at 14, because they seem slightly close in power if this feat is to be believed. Of course, you could argue multiple things, like this is propaganda because it's only seen on one world on a single etching, or you could argue that the Silent King outright defeated the Burning One, which would change a lot of course. But as I've discussed multiple times already in this video, I like to interpret it as the Silent King was aided by the Necrons, but still dealt the final blow on the Burning One. So with all these powers, reality manipulation, black hole creation, temporal distortion, galaxy scale creation and destruction, and ascendant amplification, why does the Burning One come in at number 14? Well, like I said, right below the Silent King seems appropriate. And since he is not included in the top 4 as seen in the 3rd edition Necron Codex, which lists the Nightbringer, the Deceiver, the Void Dragon, and the Outsider, even though the Deceiver is said to be the weakest in that same codex, which is kind of strange. Maybe he's a smarter or something? I don't know. Due to this, the Burning One just doesn't quite crack the upper echelon of the Catan. Like TJ the King said when we were talking about this, the Burning One is the most middle of the road the Catan have. Still, his feats and abilities as a standard Catan easily outplace those found at number 15 at their peaks, and firmly lands him at number 14 as the Catan that first breached the webway and wields the powers that can destroy galaxies. Satisfied, herd? Let's move on to 13. At number 13, we have Saranoga, the Outsider. Yes, another Catan. Wowzers. The Outsider is the star god of insanity, despair, and madness. In fact, it's said in the 3rd edition Necron Codex that its gaze causes madness and despair wherever it falls. Those in its presence would rather take their own lives than endure its hellish existence. Just like we discussed with the Burning One, as a Catan, the Outsider is already operating at a multiversal level. As one of the Catan, he was formed at the birth of reality and can manipulate matter, time, and causality, create black holes, extinguish suns, erase beings from existence, and reshape the space-time continuum. The Outsider, like all of the other uncharted Catans, operates on a level where galaxies live and die at his command. So right off the bat, he is incredibly powerful by default, but just like the Burning One, the Outsider also devoured his fellow Catan at the end of the War in Heaven, but unlike the Burning One, we actually know how many he devoured, which is 3 to be specific, as seen in the 3rd edition Necron Codex. They tell the tale of when the Laughing God tricked the Outsider into eating its brothers. The Catan's unceasing thirst for ascendancy ensured success, but fragments of its victims lingered, twisting like shards of glass within its essence, slowly but steadily driving it insane and forcing it into exile. A fun fact before we move on, because he fled before the Necron's rebellion, when they shattered all of the Catan that remained, many Imperial scholars and Necron myths believe the Outsider is the only Catan to remain whole and uncharted, which would imply he's still one of the most powerful beings still in the current setting. But back to power scaling. Just like the Ascendant Burning One, the Outsider would also be Ascendant, as he devoured 3 Catan and absorbed their essence into himself, becoming much more powerful. So that is the form of the Outsider we're going to be scaling today. Now let's talk about its unique abilities and feats. The Outsider is very unique among the Catan, as it was molded according to Grath McNeil after Yog-Sothoth, who is a cosmic entity and outer god within the Lovecraftian mythos, known as the All-in-One and One-in-All. It is the literal embodiment of the space-time continuum existing outside of the universe, while simultaneously occupying every point in time and space. And honestly, the Outsider is kind of similar to this, as seen in the Necron 3rd edition. It is able to fold upon itself, inverting its geometries and creating a labyrinth within itself, which was able to trap the other Catan it had devoured. It is also currently rumored to live in a world within a world, but that is only the tip of the iceberg. Also seen in the 3rd edition, which appears to be the only edition where the Outsider gets any lore, when the Imperium tried to scan for a celestial object, which caused a hive fleet to maneuver and change course, here is what they observed. Their auguries reveal a spherical object of indeterminate origins and nature at the center point. For this object to register via reflected light alone indicates either great size, over 32 million Terran dimensions, or a range approaching infinite. That means the Outsider is or is contained within something that is 32 million times the radius of Terra. To break that down using math, oh my god, math! Our sun has approximately 100 times the radius of Earth. The largest known star is at most approximately 2,500 times the radius of our sun. This makes the largest star approximately 250,000 times the radius of Terra. This would mean the sphere of the Outsider or the Outsider itself possesses a radius 120 times the largest known star, which implies that you could fit 2 billion copies of the largest known star and over 32 billion Terras. If the Outsider is taking up the entire sphere, it can swallow the entire solar system over 100 times. I didn't do the math on this, I will be honest, I'm not that smart, and I won't take credit for it. Thank you, Reddit. Moving on from the math section of this video, let's get to his feats, or I guess his statements, since he has no feats outside of devouring 3 unknown Catan of unknown power. In the 3rd edition, the Tyranid hive mind completely maneuvered around the Outsider, which implies it would not be able to fight it. And as for statements, while the Outsider can't match the Nightbringer for pure force, the Void Dragon for technological intellect, or the Deceiver for guile and cunning, it is rumored to be the most deadly and dangerous of the 4 remaining Catan. While this implies that it is the most deadly and dangerous, I truthfully think it is still below the Nightbringer and the Void Dragon, both of whom have statements suggesting they are more powerful than any of the other Catan, Outsider included. But this statement kind of ensures the Outsider ranking at number 13, since the Burning One is not counted amongst these 4 Catan, putting the Outsider decisively over him at number 13. Wow, 2 Catan back to back kind of shows how insane this list is going to be. Now let's move to number 12, where shit really starts to hit the fan. At number 12, we have Papa Nurgle, the Chaos God of Despair, Decay, and Disease. I know, this is quite a controversial take to have Nurgle this high on my list, but hear me out, Herd. Nurgle, at least compared to the other Chaos Gods, is a big fat fraud. Don't get me wrong, he's still insanely powerful, easily a multiversal level being, but the dude literally has no feats. I'm not kidding, out of all the Chaos Gods, he has by far the least amount of lore. Before we go into how much of a bum this guy is, we first need to discuss how powerful a Chaos God actually is, since Nurgle is the first one appearing on this list. Nurgle, like his siblings, can manipulate higher dimensions. He can also control reality, space, time, concepts, and chaos within the warp. In addition, the Chaos Gods are fed by the emotions of all living beings in the material realm. And in the case of Nurgle, he's empowered by denial, self-delusion, and the living fear of inevitable death and disease. He is also fueled by their unconscious response to that fear, the power of life. The motivating force that drives mankind and the other races to keep living despite the inevitability of decay. Moving on, it's time to talk about his specific abilities and the feats that place him as number 12 on my list. First, his plagues are so powerful that they can affect his own siblings, the Chaos Gods, and reality itself. The Night of Contracted Eyes, during which so many of his demons were rendered blind by a supernatural plague, that for a time, Tzeentch himself contracted the same disease. However, we also know that he is not the ascendant god in the Great Game in the current setting. There exists a hierarchy of sorts within the ranks of the Ruinous Powers. Though it ebbs and flows according to the vagaries of the Great Game, Khorne is held as the mightiest of all for the practice of murder, and blood sacrifice stretches to the dark beginnings of the universe. From this passage, it appears that Khorne is currently the strongest of the Chaos Gods. That creates an interesting scaling situation, because Nurgle has never been described as having a distinct prime or peak era. Because of that, the version of Nurgle we have to analyze is simply Nurgle in the current era of Warhammer 40K. Which means that logically, he has to scale somewhere below Khorne. What is interesting though, is that from the 6th edition Chaos Demons Codex, it's stated that Nurgle will eventually become the greatest Chaos God in darkness. Now, I have absolutely no idea what that actually means. Maybe the literal death of the universe, or the final entropy of reality, or maybe some cosmic age where decay becomes the dominant force of existence. And now you're probably asking yourself, how are we going to power scale Nurgle with that statement?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
We also know he's below the Emperor in 40K due to the events of Godblight, where the Emperor, while possessing Guilliman, burns Nurgle's garden and wounds the stinky boy. From the Great Manse, a cry of rage sounded, as a wall of flame hotter than a million suns devoured everything in its path, finally breaking and receding within yards of the black walls of Nurgle's house. Its infinite hall shook, mossy tiles fell from the roof, sodden timber steamed. This realm is not real. Only will is real, and none may outmatch my will. Be assured, Lord of Plagues, and convey this message to your brothers. That was directly from the Emperor, challenging Nurgle as he burned his garden. Furthermore, it stated, Nurgle's black man shivered, and Mortarion felt another presence, as powerful as the first, looking at him from behind its ever-shuttered windows. From this excerpt, you could definitely argue that the Emperor in 40K and Nurgle are quite close in power, and should be almost relative due to the statement, as powerful as the first. And honestly, I actually thought the same for quite a while, until I took a deeper dive into the context of this fight. And upon doing so, I realized something quite insane. The Emperor is inside Nurgle's garden, and because he's in Nurgle's garden, that should be where Nurgle is at his absolute strongest. When a Chaos God is in their own domain, they're supposed to be at their peak power, essentially omnipotent within that realm. Yet the Emperor still enters, and you could even argue that the Emperor isn't operating at full power here, since it's repeatedly stated that his psychic presence is scattered across the galaxy, and it takes a huge amount of effort to pull a significant portion of it together. And yet, he still manages to burn Nurgle's garden, burn large portions of it, and wound the Stink Master on his own turf. For the Death Guard fans preparing to throw poop at me, let me break it down for you. This would essentially be like me breaking into your house late at night while you're actively watching me do it. Then while you're still watching me, I set your house on fire. That's basically what happens here. Finally, the last feat he shares with the other Chaos Gods, Khorne and Slaanesh, as all three of them fought Tzeentch when he ruled over the warp as seen in the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex. There was a time when Tzeentch ruled supreme over the warp, his powers vastly superior to those of any of his brothers, and their envy and arrogance. The other Dark Gods set aside their differences and joined forces to overthrow the Architect of Fate. Territories too vast and maddening to comprehend were devastated in the cataclysmic conflict that followed. Ultimately, Tzeentch was overthrown and the balance was restored. This feat is quite insane when you realize that it's later remarked in that same codex that if Tzeentch was to regain that power, he would rule over all creation. At least Nurgle has something going for him, right guys? Still, I think this is exactly why Nurgle ranks around 12 on my list. Wasn't I right? Nurgle is a fraud compared to the other Chaos Gods. I mean, who comes into your house and burns your garden? I mean, if they did that to me, I'd be quite pissed. I'm growing a lot of carrots in mine. And those suckers take quite a long time to grow.
But farming? Really? Man of your talents?
Jokes aside, Nurgle is still one of the most powerful beings in existence, fueled by death, decay, and stagnation of the grimdark future. He just doesn't have any feats to justify placing him any higher. On to number 11. At number 11, we have our first Eldar deity, Vol, the Elder God of craft and industry. As the greatest smith among the Eldar gods, he created many weapons and inventions, which we will cover specifically in a moment. But first, let's establish how powerful an Eldar god is. The Eldar gods are warp entities, meaning they function similarly to Chaos Gods or demons in terms of metaphysical scale. During their prime, which is the version of every Eldar god we are ranking on this list, they were arguably stronger than the Chaos Gods at that present moment. I'm not saying the Eldar gods are stronger than the Chaos Gods in the current setting. I'm merely saying that at that present moment, during the War in Heaven, the Eldar gods ruled supreme, as some of the members of their pantheon were powerful enough to battle and even defeat full uncharted Catan. Now you may be asking yourself, why are the prime Eldar gods so powerful? And well, it's tied directly to the devotion of the Eldar race, which as you all may know, are the strongest psychic race outside of the old ones at their peak. Imagine millions of beings comparable to the Emperor in 30K worshipping you. Yeah, that would have a massive impact on the warp. The Eldar are literally said to have achieved mastery over time, space, and every other dimension. So yeah, being worshipped by these beings is a massive amp. Vol himself does not have any flashy or specific god powers outside of being the greatest smith, but that is exactly what makes him dangerous, as he has crafted wonders such as the Swords of Vol, the Talisman of Vol, also known as Blackstone Fortresses, or Anaris, the Light of Dawn. Keep these weapons in mind as we jump into his statements and feats. First, he is stated to be the third strongest Eldar god in the 7th edition Craftworld's Codex. The chief and oldest of all the gods is Assyrian, the Phoenix King. His first brother is Khaine, the bloody-handed god. Khaine is the master of both war and murder, and he symbolizes wanton destruction and martial prowess. Third of the greatest gods is Vol, the crippled smith god who's often depicted chained to his own anvil. So as you can see here, even crippled, he is still the third mightiest among the Eldar gods. And remember folks, we are ranking each being at their peak. That means we are looking at Vol before he was crippled, at the height of his divine power. Which brings us to his second and most important feat. His battle against Khaine while wielding Anaris, the Sword of Dawnlight. And if we're going to understand how insane that fight truly is, we first need to talk about Anarus and why it's so gosh darn powerful. Anarus is the last forged of the 100 swords of Vol, said to have been the mightiest of all, forged after his pact with Khaine fell through. The craziest part about this blade is that it's upscaled tremendously by one mere statement in the 10th edition Eldar Codex, that Anarus was imbued with all the art of his mastery. This implies it may be the full extent of Vol's mastery over his craft, and potentially it might be the greatest weapon Vol has ever created. This is the same being who has created the Blackstone Fortresses. Yes, heard, the Blackstone Fortresses, also known as the Talisman of Vol. To summarize, a Blackstone Fortress is a planetoid-sized construct that generates immense power, and its technology surpasses the current knowledge of any species in the galaxy. They are equipped with massive warp cannons known as the Eyes of the Witch that are capable of breaking the barrier between real space and warp space by firing a beam of pure immaterium that annihilates everything in its path. 2 were used by Abaddon to destroy a planet, and 3 were used to cause a star to go supernova. And despite some claims that they were created by the old ones, this is explicitly contradicted in the 9th edition Eldar Codex, a relic from before the fall, wrought by the great weaponsmith himself, Vol's Talisman, a shard of his divinity still hanging in the stars, still tangible and real. So if Anarus is more powerful than a Blackstone fortress, then it may operate on a planetary or, dare I say, cosmic level. Oh my god, I can't breathe. The implications are off the charts, man!
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
So this is the Vol that fought Khaine, a Vol wielding Anarus before being crippled at the full might of his divine power. This is the whole fight according to the 5th edition Eldar Codex. In the last days of the war in heaven, Vol reforged the blade he had to finish for Khaine, and he made it the mightiest sword of all. He called it Anarus, which made dawnlight, and with this weapon, he strode to battle with the war god. The fight was long, and Vol did Khaine much injury. Anarus darted swift and deadly as lightning, but in the end, Khaine's fury overpowered the smith god and toppled him from the heavens. Oh my god, I don't know about you guys, but I got goosebumps all over. The fight was long, Vol wounded Khaine significantly, Anarus was fast and deadly as lightning, but unfortunately, Khaine overpowered him and crippled him, leaving him imprisoned. And to cover my bases, the 10th edition Eldar Codex reiterates this myth with essentially the same conclusion. I mean, yeah, it's right there, yeah, bam, correlations met. So Vol was able to duel Khaine for an extended period of time and wound him severely before falling. And let's not forget, just like Swiper knows swipings, Khaine steals Anarus from Vol after this, gaining a planetary to cosmic tier weapon. I will agree that I may be glazing Anarus a little too hard, but hey, statements are statements at the end of the day, and I'm just doing my job here, people. Unfortunately, Vol meets the same fate as all of the other Eldar gods and is devoured by the Dark Prince upon its birth. But since Vol at this point was already crippled and weakened as seen in the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex, which states the Eldar gods died in the fall and the Eldar despised them for it. That the gods had become so weak that they could be consumed by the ascendancy of the Eldar's collective depravity is seen as proof that they no longer deserved to exist in the first place. So I'm not really gonna hold it against my pal Vol because, you know, he's weakened and crippled, even though he did get no diff off screen. This version of Vol is a far cry from the version we are ranking, since we are looking at Prime Vol wielding Anarus, creator of the Blackstone Fortresses, third strongest among the Eldar gods, who was able to significantly wound Khaine in a high diff fight. This guy is my goat. I bet you didn't see this one coming, Herd.
Bro, I knew I liked you, dude. Come here, bring it in. Bring it in, brother.
The Vulcan wannabe, crippled Eldar god Vol with the Anarus sword amp comes in at number 11. Isn't it crazy that destroying a planet or even a star is just a normal feat for all of these fellas? People who say 40k isn't overpowered are being silly. This universe is absolutely nuts. Next up is number 10. Make your bets, people. Make your bets. Assyrian, the Phoenix King, comes in at number 10. The Phoenix King was the eldest and most senior of all the Eldar gods and is described as the ancestor of all living things. He gifted the mortal Eldari wisdom and introspection and is revered by seers of all kinds. As the supreme figure of the pantheon, he stood above the other gods in authority and age, which is seen in the passage we discussed in the Vol section as seen in the 7th edition Craftworld's Codex. The chief and oldest of all the gods is Assyrian, the Phoenix King. So hierarchy-wise, Assyrian sits above Khaine and Vol. Now unfortunately, Assyrian only has 2 major feats, but they are absolutely massive for power scaling implications. In the 9th edition Eldar Codex, Assyrian created a great barrier that separated the realm of gods from mortals for all eternity. Assyrian, with the same wisdom, he gifted the Eldari, forged an impenetrable barrier between heaven and the mortal realm, so was Khaine's murderous rampage halted. This barrier separated the warp from real space and prevented the gods themselves from directly interfering with mortals, specifically Khaine, who couldn't even breach it. But folks, it gets even crazier. Brace yourselves. Although that barrier has been damaged over time, it still functions in the current era of 40K and continues to prevent what remains of the warp, including the Chaos Gods, from fully breaking into the physical realm. His second feat comes in battle against the Nightbringer, a Catan from the 4th edition Eldar Codex. According to Eldari myth, Assyrian battled the Nightbringer but was unable to achieve a decisive victory. To protect his children, he rearranged the stars themselves to cast an ill omen upon the Catan and unleashed a massive solar flare that mortally wounded the Nightbringer's physical form. We can gather 2 things from this. First, Assyrian manipulated the stars. That is a cosmic level manipulation feat, unless we take it purely metaphorically, which I'm not. Second, he straight up wounded the Nightbringer, but did not outright defeat him. And until the solar flare attack, they appeared relatively comparable. Unfortunately though, since we are talking about another Eldar god, we then come to the birth of Slaanesh and my Buki gets devoured.
Oh my god. Oh my god. My Shayla.
It is said that Assyrian shed bitter tears as he watched the newborn god Slaanesh devour the souls of the Eldar. Along with most gods, Assyrian was killed by Slaanesh, who destroyed him and stole his power. This is also seen in the 4th edition. Now, for context, that was not peak Assyrian. Just like I discussed with Vol, by the time of the fall, I kinda made that rhyme, the Eldari gods were significantly weakened. A millennia of hedonism, neglect of worship, and the psychic backlash of their civilization's collapse starved the pantheon, rendering them unable to resist the newly born great enemy. Do I think he could have beaten Slaanesh at his full prime? Probably not, but Prime War in Heaven Assyrian would have fared far better than a weakened version that got no-diffed and eaten. So why does he end up at number 10? Assyrian is the chief of the Eldar gods, easily ranking him over Vol. He created a barrier that separated the warp and real space that still persists to this day. He manipulated stars, wounded the Nightbringer, a stronger Catan than the Burning One or the Outsider, easily has better feats than the Stinkmaster, and he scales above the Big 3 at 15. And I would like to remind you guys, this is just another character casually operating at star and reality manipulation levels. We are finally moving into the bottom half of the top 10, and I think people might start booing me here. But hold on to your tomatoes, I might be able to cook here. Coming in at number 9, we have the Emperor upon the Golden Throne in the current setting of 40K. This is our second Emperor form on this list, and while physically he is a rotting corpse unturned on the Golden Throne, his psychic presence remains one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. In fact, he has become more of a warp being than anything else, sustained by thousands of psychers every day for the last 10,000 years, and the worship of a decaying empire. The Emperor in 40K is landlocked compared to his 30K self, which we ranked at number 15, but he is immensely more powerful as a warp entity at this point. He is capable of fate, reality, and scheme manipulation on a galactic scale, explicitly seen in the 5th edition Warhammer rulebook. His immense psychic powers envelop and protect mankind across the entire galaxy. His consciousness wanders through warp space, warring against demons that inhabit it, keeping closed the doors between this world and the next. Also, it appears that if the Emperor fails, all of mankind will be lost according to the 7th edition rulebook. Physically fettered, chained atop mountainous banks of machinery, the Emperor's mind stretches out through space and time, a light in the vast gulf of blackness. Should that spark of life ever be extinguished, should the throne fail in its mysterious purpose, then mankind would surely be lost. Outside of protecting the collective of humanity, the Emperor's current powers are focused on 3 monumental tasks that prevent the immediate collapse of the Imperium. First, he powers the Astronomicon, a lighthouse that allows navigators to guide their ships through warp space, making interstellar travel and trade possible for the Imperium. Second is keeping the webway closed. Beneath the Golden Throne lies a ruptured portal into the Imperial webway. The Emperor must exert a massive portion of his will to keep this portal sealed. If he fails, Terra would be flooded by an endless tide of demons from the warp. And third, as we discussed earlier, he wards against chaos. His mind constantly battles the 4 chaos gods within the Immaterium, as he actively protects the souls of the faithful and shields humanity from complete demonic incursion across the galaxy. As for his most recent feats, he's able to wound Nurgle, as we just discussed in the book Godblight, and heal Guilliman from the same disease. Which, if you guys don't know, the Godblight is an insane poison. The poison was so potent that Kugath boasted it could not only kill a Primarch, but erase their very essence from the warp. Yet the Emperor healed it quite easily, it appears. Once again, I'm bringing back this statement. Nurgle's Black Mance shivered and Mortarion felt another presence, as powerful as the first, looking back at him from behind its ever-shuttered windows. This reinforces the statement that the Emperor entered Nurgle's garden, burned his house down, and Nurgle sat there and did absolutely nothing. I honestly could see an argument for the Emperor being higher because of how nutty this feat is, but since there's no actual proof that he could do this to the other 3 gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, I have to leave him below them for now. Honest to God, that's not even his greatest feat, which comes from the End and the Death Part 3 during his fight with Horus. And I know, why didn't I bring this up when I was talking about number 15? Well, I actually did, but since the Emperor in 40K is much more powerful than his 30K variation, you have never set much store by cartomancy, but you are quite familiar with the tarot symbols and their significance. The cards always seem to you an imprecise method, the mummery of sigillites and warlocks, sometimes effective in divination, but always so vague in their elastic meaning and thus largely unreliable. Now you have ascended as a psychic initiate. You have a new appreciation of their etheric function. They are sigils of imagination, binding intuitive, non-verbal definitions to archetypes of the cosmos. The cards are a high and arcane art, capable of subtle interaction and piercing precognitive effect. But here in your realm, awash with the warp, their symbology goes beyond pure precognition. Rather than interpreting outcomes, they can set them. They can determine the user's desired effect, and then manifest the cause to produce it. They are spurs to impel destiny to obey your will. So this is from Horus's perspective, as he and the Emperor essentially play Yu-Gi-Oh! Against each other.
The unstoppable Exodia!
Impossible!
I've assembled all 5 special cards.
Exodia! It's not possible!
Exodia! Obliterate!
But it's not merely Yu-Gi-Oh!, as the cards they are using is fate itself. As both Horus and the Emperor are so powerful and so steeped in the warp that they can manipulate the skein. I discussed the Khaine earlier, but let's briefly talk about it yet again. The Khaine, or you could simply call it fate, is the complex, tangled web of potential futures and casual threads that exist in the past, present, and future. So by these two characters manipulating the Khaine, they are actively changing the future, past, or present, depending on the thread they choose to change. And since the Emperor in 40K is much more powerful than his 30K variation, he should be able to do this on a galactic scale. And may have already been doing this with his living saint. This shows why the Emperor in 40K easily scales above Asuryan, Vol, Nurgle, and the other gods behind him. And honestly, you could really argue him much higher on this list. There's just not enough evidence to support it, without some bias coming through. Next time we do this, I can only assume the Emperor will move up on this list due to new lore.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
But the corpse on the Golden Throne comes in at number 9. At number 8, we have Slaanesh, the chaos god of lust, greed, excess, pain, pleasure, perfection, and hedonism. Slaanesh was born from the catastrophic collapse of the Eldar Empire. Like the other chaos gods, like Nurgle, Slaanesh possesses the same fundamental class of power that defines the Chaos Pantheon. She has the ability to exist within and manipulate higher dimensions of the warp. This means she can warp reality on a conceptual level, altering the warp, reshaping the laws of existence, bending causality and entire layers of reality from the immaterium. There's also this passage from the 6th edition Chaos Demons Codex that helps us contextualize how the Chaos Gods interact with one another in terms of power. Last in the Pantheon is Slaanesh, who knows how well to play on the obsessions of his rivals. Khorne's single-minded bloodlust, Nurgle's quest to infect every living thing, and Tzeentch's compulsion to dabble in the fates of mortals, all are obsessions which the Lord of Excess can turn to his will with a whispered promise. This essentially means that although Slaanesh is said to be at the bottom of the Pantheon, she has the potential to rise above the rest, because she feeds on obsession and excess in all forms. That includes lust, desire, indulgence, pride, perfectionism, addiction, sensation, and emotion, all empower the Prince of Pleasure. In other words, the very obsessions that drive the other Chaos Gods, Khorne's bloodlust, Nurgle's fixation on decay, and Tzeentch's endless plotting, can become sources of power for Slaanesh. Before you start pointing fingers at me and saying, "Wait, cow, didn't that passage just say Slaanesh is at the bottom?" Well, fellas, we're not simply looking at Slaanesh in the modern setting of 40K, because that is not her peak. The version we are examining today is Slaanesh at the moment of her birth, when the god had just consumed the psychic cataclysm of the Eldar fall, and was filled with unimaginable power drawn from billions upon billions of Eldar souls, and the destruction of their pantheon. I will admit, there isn't an exact statement in 40K specifically saying that Slaanesh was the mightiest of all the gods at that current time. But if you think logically, it would make sense and would not surprise me if Slaanesh was. Which leads us to Slaanesh's primary and most significant feat, the devouring of the Eldar gods and her battle with Khaine. This is from the 8th edition Craftworld's Codex. At the moment of its birth, Slaanesh decimated the Eldari pantheon and stole the gods' power, with only 2 of their number surviving the fall. The laughing god Kegarak escaped through guile, while Khaine, the strongest and most warlike of the Eldari deities, endured through might. Slaanesh and the bloody-handed god fought a titanic battle in the warp, and despite Khaine's mastery of war, Slaanesh, glutted with stolen power, eventually proved the stronger. Exhausted from the struggle, Slaanesh could not destroy the Eldari god completely. Instead, Khaine was rent into fragments. Each shard came to rest within the Wraithbone core of a craft world, where it took root and grew into an avatar of the bloody-handed god. So as we can see here, Slaanesh spit on these knife ears, and not in the kinky way. This devouring didn't even seem like it was difficult for Slaanesh, as established lore and codexes makes it seem like they didn't put up any resistance at all before being devoured. That's a tough look for the Eldar gods. That was when Slaanesh fought Khaine. This version of Khaine would also be somewhat weakened like the other Eldar gods. Yet even in this diminished state, he still managed to put up a massive fight against Slaanesh. That alone kind of tells you how powerful Khaine really was. It also highlights the significance of Aneris, Vol's greatest weapon, you know, the one that Khaine stole after he banged Vol's ass. Despite all of this, Slaanesh ultimately won the battle, though it left her exhausted and unable to fully devour Khaine, instead shattering him into fragments that would later become the avatars of Khaine within each craft world. There is also another interpretation of these events, and I feel like we should talk about it just to make sure I'm covering my bases. This alternative fight between Khaine and Slaanesh occurs in Rise of the Ynnari: Ghost Warrior. Here, myth is conflicted, and sagas of one craft world differ from the epics of another, as much as they differ again from the folktales of Kamun Ra and the dances of the desperate Harlequin Mass. Some say that she who thirsts tried to consume Khaine, but in struggling from her grip, the bloody-handed one shredded into many parts, and the tatters of his existence fluttered down into the universe of mortals. Some say that Khaine was always the son of the great enemy and the Lord of Skulls. Their twain desires of glory and bloodshed matched within his breast. The elevation of the doom of the Ynnari was too much and broke apart his immortal frame, scattering bloody parts into the cosmos. And there are those that claim the Brass King and She Who Thirsts fought openly for possession of the bloody-handed. And in the struggle, Khaine was split asunder and flaming fragments of his being were released into reality. In short, this passage shows us several mythological interpretations of Khaine's shattering. Whether it was purely Slaanesh's doing, whether Khaine tore himself apart escaping, or whether Khorne and Slaanesh fought over him is unknown. However, since the 8th and 10th edition codexes present the earlier version we talked about, where Khaine and Slaanesh openly fought, I'm going to generally consider that the more accurate modern interpretation of these events. To summarize, at the time of her birth, Slaanesh may have been the strongest Chaos God at that moment or near to it, possessed the stolen power of multiple Eldar gods, was empowered by billions upon billions of Eldar souls, and defeated a weakened Khaine, even while wielding Aneris, Vol's greatest weapon. In addition to this fight, like Nurgle, Slaanesh also fought against Tzeentch when he ruled over all of creation, and helped Khorne and Nurgle defeat him, which upscales base Slaanesh and thus upscales again Slaanesh when he was born. So why is Slaanesh only ranked at number 8? Well, simply put, I don't see how I could justify placing the Emperor above Slaanesh without real evidence to support it, even though it is plausible. Nonetheless, you will soon realize why Slaanesh ends up here compared to the other 2 remaining Chaos Gods. We're getting there, just be patient, my little cows. Either way, Slaanesh is kind of a weird one to rank, because I may be giving her too much credit at the time of her birth, and she may have been operating just at base. But using power scaling logic and my simple cow interpretation, I think Slaanesh was definitely amped in some way, shape, or form at the time of her birth. And after her fight with Khaine, where she grew exhausted, she lost that power, or it was spent fighting the bloody-handed one. Regardless, Slaanesh at the time of her birth comes in at number 8. Let's move on to number 7, where we enter controversy. Coming in at number 7, we have Azagarad, the Nightbringer. The Nightbringer is the star god of death, destruction, and darkness, and is counted among the top 4 of the Catan race. Like the rest of the Catan, he is a star and soul-eating entity whose power dwarfs almost all others in the galaxy. He possesses the same abilities as well. He can manipulate matter and energy on a stellar level, reshape reality, space, time, and absorb the essence of other Catan to exponentially increase his own power. According to the 5th edition Necron Codex, he is described as the doom of stars and the demise of worlds. The shard of the Nightbringer is death incarnate. When unleashed upon the battlefield, it manifests as a towering, cloaked reaper that shines with dark light. An image that resonates deeply in the primal subconscious of many of the younger races. Older lore even describes him as the fiercest and most powerful of the Catan, having laid waste to star systems, planets, and civilizations with his dark scythe. However, it appears this statement has been retconned in the 9th edition Necron Codex, as it places another Catan as the strongest over the Nightbringer. Shh. I'm not gonna give it away yet. Shh, just hold on, be patient, herd. You're gonna have to trust me on this one. Beyond the sheer destruction of vast swaths of the galaxy, the Nightbringer left a permanent imprint on the minds of the younger species, planting seeds of terror and death that would go on to shape entire civilizations. And I don't think you guys fully grasp how insane of a feat this actually is. He effectively became a universal personification of death for countless species across the galaxy. And what makes this even more absurd is that he has no warp presence due to the fact that he's a Catan. If this was a warp-based phenomenon, it would still be incredibly impressive, but at the least, somewhat understandable. The warp is malleable, and we know that demons and gods can form around concepts fueled by psychic belief and emotional resonance. But the Nightbringer didn't do this through the warp. He left such an overwhelming mark on real space, through the scale and horror of his slaughter, that the psychological echo of his actions scarred the minds of other races. The scale of slaughter required to leave that kind of imprint on a galactic consciousness must have been utterly unimaginable. You could truly see why the Nightbringer is such a force to be reckoned with. I'm not gonna lie, the Discord and I had a very tough time ranking this fella. Originally, we had him at 3, and then he dropped to 6, and then sadly, he ended up here at 7.
No, I can't laugh yet. I've got to hold it in.
Like the Emperor in 40K, I could totally see him higher, but I think the folks we still have to rank are just simply put better than him. Luckily, this is not the end of the Nightbringer, since he also consumed many of his fellow Catan, which seems to be a staple of all the Catan on this list. So the Nightbringer also ascended to a level of power comparable to the Burning One and the Outsider. This occurred when the Nightbringer was deceived by, get this, the Deceiver. As seen in the 3rd edition Necron Codex, the Nightbringer began a reign of slaughter, hunting and devouring his brethren until only 4 remained. And I don't want to just gloss over this. The Nightbringer was able to defeat other beings like him that were capable of manipulating reality, time, and space. And the Nightbringer still devoured them. Beyond this and his general cosmic destruction, the Nightbringer has two major recorded fights, both occurring before his ascendancy. The first was against Assyrian, where they were relatively matched until Assyrian rearranged a sun's constellations to create a time of ill omen and harnessed the resulting stellar energy to deal a mortal blow, leaving the Nightbringer nearly destroyed. The second fight was against Khaine. Now, this was before Khaine had Anaris or reached his full prime, but he was still incredibly powerful. In that battle, Khaine shattered the Nightbringer's necrodermis, wounding him, but the resulting shards pierced Khaine and forever marked him with an aspect of the Reaper. These are the only recorded feats we have before his ascension, which may make you think, why is he above Assyrian if he was mortally wounded by him? Well, just like the Burning One and the Outsider, we're ranking his ascendant form, after he devoured a vast number of fellow Catan, which likely amplified his power tremendously. The tricky part is, folks, is that we don't have any feats from the Nightbringer, the Burning One, or the Outsider after they devoured their brethren. So we truly don't know how powerful these ascendant forms are, but going based off logic, it would make sense that these Catan became much more powerful depending on how many of their kin they devoured. Since it appears the Nightbringer devoured a heinous amount of Catan, I think it's reasonable to assume that he became far stronger than Assyrian, who receives no comparable amp. Even with this new form, the Nightbringer was still sharded by the Necrons using trickery. I mean, you could technically count the Necrons needing a super powerful grav hypercannon to shatter him, but that's kinda grasping at straws. If I'm being honest, all the characters here, at least in the top 10, could be altered or changed depending on one's personal agenda or takes on them. The gaps between each of these characters is marginal at best, and the way you interpret certain things definitely could result in them moving around. Despite these uncertainties, your favorite falling cow has placed the Ascendant Nightbringer solidly at number 7 on this list, and he absolutely deserves it. If you disagree with this placement, let me know down in the comments and why. I'd love to hear your takes. Let's move on to number 6. At the 6th spot, we have Yanid, the Whispering God or the God of the Dead. Yanid is an unborn Eldar deity growing within the collective infinity circuits of every craft world, fueled by the souls of the deceased Eldar. Of course, I know you guys are probably confused and bewildered and are going to ask, why the hell did you include Yanid, Cow? He doesn't even exist yet. Well, my reasoning is I wanted to include every being regardless of status in 40k. Because we've already included Assyrian and Vol, who are both dead at this current moment. If you want a logical answer, then look towards the warp. Time is fluid, and the moment of birth or ascension of a god does not limit their influence across eras. Even before Slaanesh's birth, she was described as always existing, so it kinda makes sense to consider potential gods like Yanid, even though the chances of him being born are slim to none due to 40k's hatred of the Eldar. Yanid represents the last hope of the dwindling Eldari race. Legend states that once every infinity circuit holds the spirits of all the Eldar, all craft worlds will unite into one superstructure, and the collective spirits of the Eldar will coalesce into a new power in the warp, capable of challenging and ultimately subduing Slaanesh. This is supported further by the 8th edition Eldar Codex, which states, Yanid, the slumbering god of the dead. The prophecies of the fabled seer, Cassandras, tell that when every Eldar has passed from mortal existence, Yanid will rise up and defeat Slaanesh forevermore. Also, it appears Yanid is fundamentally an anathema to all 4 Chaos Gods, who can't even perceive him properly. As seen in the 10th edition Eldar Codex, even the gods of Chaos did not look upon the creature directly. The incarnation of Yanid's essence was so anathema to them, they could not truly perceive it, even had they known where to look. So it seems that Yanid can both defeat Slaanesh, and appears to have an advantage over all 4 Chaos Gods, and although Yanid has not been officially born, the Yinkarn, the avatar of Yanid, has already demonstrated staggering capabilities, despite being only a partial manifestation. When moving through the warp, the Yinkarn caused massive disruptions in the Immaterium, flinging Imperial ships hundreds of light years away, and even distorting the light of the Astronomicon. These feats imply that the god's ultimate power could vastly exceed what we have seen so far from the Avatar. There have been 2 major attempts to awaken Yanid in history. The first was undertaken by Eldrith Uthran, who attempted a monumental ritual channeling the remains of Farseers through every infinity circuit to awaken Yanid prematurely. The ritual would have temporarily disabled every craft world and wreaked havoc on the Astronomicon, but it would have potentially ended Slaanesh's existence. However, in true 40k fashion, that plan was foiled by the Death Watch. Way to go, boys, way to go. The second attempt involved the formation of the Ynnari, led by Yffrain, who sought to awaken Yanid through the 7th path using the Crone Swords. This method would allow the god to be revived without sacrificing the Eldar race. And it was during this ritual that the Yinkarn manifested, as seen in Warhammer 40k Death Mask. Unfortunately, you need all of the Crone Swords to complete this ritual, and one of them is stuck in Slaanesh's palace. So essentially, that means it's never gonna happen. It appears that Games Workshop has given up on giving the Ynnari new lore, and thus it's very unlikely that Yanid will ever appear at full power anytime soon. Even so, Yanid's role as the destined slayer of Slaanesh combines with the fact that the Avatar alone has already demonstrated the ability to manipulate the warp, move entire fleets across light years, and distort the Astronomicon, firmly establishes Yanid as one of the most powerful potential entities in 40k. I will say his placement at number 6 is going to be very controversial, and I'm probably going to end up on Reddit and get shit on quite a bit.
You were right.
I'll always be a villain.
But it does make sense when considering that he's explicitly stated to be capable of outright destroying a Chaos God, a feat that none of the characters ranked below him have ever demonstrated. I think that alone justifies positioning Ynid above the others, as his potential power surpasses what is shown while still grounding his rank in the lore's most extreme claims. Is Ynid the most potential man of all time? I don't know, guys. I don't think he beats Megami from JJK. Ynid comes in at number 6. We're reaching the top 5. This is where things get really hard. As we reach the top 5, I just want to say this was an absolute blast to make and has been on my list to do for quite some time. I hope you guys are all enjoying this installment of Power Scaling Babes. At number 5, we have Khaine, the bloody-handed god, also known as the Lord of Murder and the Eldari god of warfare, bloodshed, murder, violence, strife, destruction, and war. Similar to Asuryan and Vol, Khaine is a member of the Eldar pantheon, and so is worshipped by the collective psyche of the Eldar race, which by itself is a huge amp due to the fact that the Eldar were the most psychically powerful species in the galaxy outside of their creators, the Old Ones. Before we continue, I need to clarify exactly which version of Khaine we are exactly talking about and ranking before we all get lost down the goal. In this video, we are ranking Prime Khaine, the version that existed when the Eldar civilization stood at its zenith towards the near end of the War in Heaven and during the brief golden age that followed before the Eldar fell into decadence and gotta mean. At that time, Khaine would have been massively empowered by the psychic might of the Eldar race. But that's not all. If you guys remember, after defeating Vol, Khaine stole Anaris, Vol's greatest creation. As we discussed plenty earlier, Anaris scales to absurd levels of power. By implication alone, it surpasses even the planet-destroying weapons of the Blackstone fortresses, which when wielded by the right individual can tear open the boundaries between the physical and immaterial realms and destroy celestial objects like planets or stars, implying that Anaris could do that or even more. Yes, I am glazing the hell out of this sword. And if you were an Eldar fan, you would do the same. Come on now, don't get too mad at me. Thus, the version of Khaine we are looking at is Prime Khaine, empowered by the Eldar at their peak, wielding Anaris. This version of Khaine is cracked, and honestly it makes me a little sad we will probably never see Khaine at this level ever again in 40k. BRB, I'm just gonna go cry for like 45 minutes or something. Now it's time to discuss his feats, most of which we've already discussed except for one. The event that ultimately forced Asuryan to create the barrier between the material and the warp. Lilith dreamed that Khaine would be torn into 100 pieces by a great mortal army. When Khaine learned of this, he resolved to destroy the Eldar. He pursued them through the universe, trapping and slaying many before Asuryan heard the weeping of Isha and so learned of Lilith's dream and Khaine's plan. To save the few who remained, Asuryan placed a great barrier between mortals and gods, dividing them for all eternity and forbidding any further contact between them. Yep, you heard that right. Khaine was already slaughtering the Eldar race before the War in Heaven had already reached its climax. The rest of Khaine's feats have already been addressed when discussing the other characters ranked below him, but they are still worth a brief revisit. First is his battle with the Nightbringer, as seen in the Dawn of the Khatan. I'm going to read the full excerpt because I'm feeling extra power scaly in this video. From the ground beneath them burst the Nightbringer, and the Eldar fell back, for they knew their doom was at hand. Khaine Ra slew all those near him. With a glance, it condemned the souls of great warriors into an eternity of dust. With a great roar, Khaine leveled his spear and charged. Scythe and spear clashed over a mound of corpses in a struggle that tore the skies asunder. Khaine's speed and skill was breathtaking, but the Nightbringer was a being of shadow and the spear of Khaine could not find its mark. Khaine Ra let its foe exhaust his rage with the patience of death. Without warning, the Nightbringer swung mightily with his scythe, aiming for Khaine's throat. But Khaine had heeded the counsel of the Laughing God well. As the Nightbringer's form became solid to deliver its blow, Khaine lunged, the tip of his spear driving clean through the Yagnir's chest. Khaine Ra burst apart in an explosion of silvered shards that nearly cleft Khaine in two, as its essence tore free of physical form. The silver warriors around him fell to the earth as the impact spread ever outward, returning to the ground from whence they came. Soon only Khaine remained howling his victory. Some people do claim that the 9th edition Necron Codex retcons this fight, but it appears more accurate to say that both Viserion and Khaine wounded the Nightbringer earlier in the War in Heaven, long before the C'tan were eventually shattered after they had devoured many of their fellow star gods. A brief timeline would look like the Viserion fight, then the Khaine fight, and then very long extended period of time, the C'tan then devour their own, and then they are shattered by the Necrons. It also appears that Kegarak may have given Khaine advice during the fight, which slightly reduces how impressive this feat is, but even so, Khaine accomplished this far from his prime and without Anaris. Next, Khaine fought Vol, the Smith God. Vol wielded Anaris in that battle, yet Khaine ultimately defeated him and left him crippled, though Khaine himself took a severe beating. This occurred during the closing days of the War in Heaven, when Khaine was already approaching his prime. After the victory, Khaine stole Anaris for himself. And then finally, Khaine fought Slaanesh at the moment of the Dark Prince's birth. Just like we discussed in the Slaanesh section, while 40k lore specifically never explicitly confirms Slaanesh as the strongest Chaos God at that point, logically speaking, it would make sense if she was. Yet Khaine, who was weakened at that time, as noted in the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex, fought Slaanesh, and while she ultimately emerged victorious, it was only after a long and exhausting battle. So Khaine has 3 big fights, 2 wins, and 1 loss, but that loss is a feat in itself. Since I've kind of been doing this for every single character, let me explain thoroughly why he ranks above Slaanesh and Ynneed. Because I can already see the cow brains cooking. Why would Khaine scale above someone he lost to, and the character who was supposed to defeat the person he lost to? To explain this, we have to step into the slightly autistic power scaling brain of your favorite falling cow. Hold on to your seats, guys. This is gonna get really silly really fast. So, the version of Khaine that fought Slaanesh was already weakened. Earlier in the War of Heaven, Khaine had defeated the Nightbringer, a being that is capable of destroying massive regions of real space. If a weakened Khaine could push a freshly born, supposedly massively empowered Slaanesh to exhaustion, then it is not unreasonable to assume that Prime Khaine, still empowered by the Eldar at the height of their civilization, would perform far better. And the version we're ranking not only is in his prime, but also has Anaris. If that implication is correct, that it was made with all of Vol's mastery, that would imply that it's superior to a Blackstone fortress, which can destroy celestial objects. So from a power scaling perspective, it becomes very clear, come on, right? Prime Khaine plus Anaris is stronger than Slaanesh at the time of the fall.
Yes, that sequence of words I said made perfect sense.
Now, what about Ynneed? Because this is where things get pretty messy. Ynneed is prophesized to defeat Slaanesh outright, which is incredibly impressive. But the key detail is that Ynneed would be fighting a modern version of Slaanesh, not the version of Slaanesh that had just been born. It pretty much comes down to the fact that Khaine fought a long and exhausting battle against a supposedly massively amped Slaanesh, and that if he was in his prime wielding Anaris, he probably would have won, which scales him over Ynneed, who is only stated to defeat the Slaanesh in the current era of 40k. I know there's a lot of dots crossing there, and it probably doesn't make any sense to you guys watching, but that's how I see it. Of course, this whole argument goes out the window if Slaanesh did not have a buff at this current moment in time, and that overall Slaanesh is equal across the board regardless of time, as it's never explicitly stated that Slaanesh lost that power from its birth, and might still have the abilities of all the Eldar gods it devoured. So you could totally argue Ynneed above Khaine, and that would be a completely valid interpretation. Truthfully, I found an excerpt from Liber Chaotica that said Slaanesh was stronger than all of the Chaos Gods at her birth. But since that technically is using Warhammer Fantasy lore, I didn't want to factor it into this video. which really hurts my argument, but I wanted to remain as honest and fair as possible. So yeah, this is a very controversial take, but at number 5 we have Khaine, the bloody-handed god. Now let's move to 4. At number 4 we have Khorne, the blood god. Khorne is the chaos god of anger, violence, and hate. And like all the other chaos gods we've already discussed, he exists as a vast warp entity whose nature transcends conventional physical limitations, similar to Slaanesh and Nurgle. Khorne can also manipulate higher dimensions and exist within them simultaneously. He can warp the reality of his own realm as well as influence the warp itself. And just like his siblings, he possesses the ability to manipulate reality, concepts, and the fundamental laws and structures that govern existence. At his core, Khorne represents something very specific within the warp's metaphysical ecosystem, the embodiment of the compulsion to dominate and destroy as seen specifically in the 6th edition Chaos Demons Codex. Khorne is the Lord of Rage, Taker of Skulls. He is Wrath incarnate, the embodiment of a never-ending compulsion to dominate and destroy. It is his sole desire to drown the galaxy in a tide of slaughter, to conquer and kill every living thing until there is nothing left but spilt blood and shattered bone. Khorne also embodies the very concept of conflict. Because the Chaos Gods are conceptual beings born from the psychic and emotional output of sentient life, Khorne's influence is tied directly to every act of violence, aggression, or competition that occurs anywhere in reality or across time and space. As stated in Black Crusade Tome of Blood, the concepts Khorne embodies makes him effectively omnipresent across time and space. Every act of hostility, from the smallest argument to the largest war, feeds directly into his power. Because of this relationship with violence and warfare, the current era of 40K heavily favors Khorne in the Great Game. The galaxy is in a state of near constant war, and so the emotional fuel that empowers him is flowing at an absurd rate. This is directly seen in the 6th edition, which explicitly states that Khorne is currently the strongest of the Chaos Gods. There exists a hierarchy of sorts within the ranks of the Ruinous Powers. Though it ebbs and flows according to the vagaries of the Great Game, currently Khorne is held as the mightiest of all, for the practice of murder and blood sacrifice stretches to the dark beginnings of the universe. This statement is extremely important for scaling purposes because it confirms that in the present era of 40K, Khorne is the ascendant power among the Chaos Pantheon. That means he must logically scale above the other base Chaos Gods in the current setting. As for feats and statements of prowess, the codexes provide some absolutely insane feats. According to the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex, Khorne has personally slain lesser warp gods and taken their skulls as trophies, wearing them as rings. Besides being one pimpin' cool thing to do, this demonstrates that he possesses the ability to destroy other divine warp entities and even negate forms of immortality normally associated with warp beings. His weapon is also described in the 6th edition as something utterly absurd in scale. At Khorne's side rests a great two-handed sword, a legendary blade capable of laying waste to the substance of worlds with a single blow. This fell weapon is known by various names to the races of the galaxy, including Woebringer, Warmaker, and the End of All Things. It is said that when Khorne takes up his sword, a single sweep can cut through reality itself, allowing Khorne's demonic legions to spill forth. And funnily enough, we actually see this in action in Arc of Omens Angron. During the events of the Arc of Omens Angron, Khorne gets up from his skull throne and swings his star-killing blade, channeling that strike through his foremost champions. This results in several unfortunate things for the Imperium. First, he destroys an entire moon, killing billions of Imperium lives. Second, Khorne strikes the entire star system with a murder curse. Every Imperial warrior left in system, which is probably estimated to trillions, becomes instantly corrupted by Khorne. That includes the Navy, Guardsmen, Sisters of Battle, Primaris Marines, Admech, Titans, and even the Inquisition are instantly broken and turned into frothing berserkers. This is an absurd feat for Khorne, because it shows that even with a fraction of his power, he can destroy moons and turn trillions to his cause with a single swing of his sword. But even crazier than that, I know, what is even crazier than that? Khorne has also fought Slaanesh from the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex. During the eternal conflict that is the Great Game, Tzeentch tricked Slaanesh into battling with Khorne, a war that it could not possibly hope to win, and Slaanesh was defeated and humiliated. Wow, so Khorne just straight up beat Slaanesh and even humiliated the Dark Prince. This would be base Slaanesh, so not the theoretical Slaanesh at her prime during her birth, but it's highly impressive and shows that Khorne really is that guy amongst the Chaos Pantheon in the current setting. Finally, we come to his last feat, which is similar to the other Chaos Gods, when he assisted Slaanesh and Nurgle in overthrowing Tzeentch during the era when he ruled supreme over the Warp. I won't show the excerpt again because we've already talked about it twice, but just like last time, it is an upscale for all of the base Chaos Gods at that moment. But most of all, in the current era of 40k, Khorne is the Ascendant God in the Great Game. This is ultimately why Khorne slots in at number 4 on this list. Unlike the characters ranked below him, Khorne is not only capable of manipulating various levels of reality, the warp, and time and space, but he is also currently the strongest member of their pantheon. When you combine his conceptual omnipresence, his ability to destroy other warp gods, the cosmic scale of his weaponry, and the fact that the entire galaxy is currently feeding him an endless supply of violence and bloodshed, it becomes very clear why Mr. Blood for the Blood God earns the number 4 spot on this list. Oh boy, it's been a journey. Quick, before we enter the top 3, make your predictions right now. No cheating, no cheating. I want who you think will be 1, 2, 3 right now, and I know if you don't do it, I have cameras in your house, and they're cow-shaped, but that's why you don't see them. They're so hidden in plain sight that only a man of great psychic power would see one. The winner will get 1 million milks, whatever the hell that means. On to number 3. As the 3rd strongest being in the whole universe of 40k, we have Magladroth, also known as the Void Dragon or simply the Dragon. Just like the other Catan we have already covered on this list, the Void Dragon belongs to the ancient race of the Catan. Like the Nightbringer, the Outsider, and the Burning One, the Void Dragon is a being of pure cosmic energy that inhabits a necrodermis shell and possesses complete dominion over the material universe, allowing it to manipulate reality, space, time, and the very fundamental laws of physics. Additionally, as a Catan, the Void Dragon can consume stars, reshape planets, and existed as a near unstoppable cosmic entity during the War in Heaven. However, even among these absurdly powerful star gods, it appears the Void Dragon stands above the rest, as the Void Dragon is described as the most powerful of all the ancient star gods, having once possessed the ability to create invincible warriors. This is reiterated again in the 9th edition Necron Codex, which states that the Void Dragon was the greatest and most terrible of all the Catan. But unlike the other Catan, the Void Dragon never devoured any of his fellow Catan during the period when the star gods began cannibalizing each other. So he does not gain in ascendant form like the Nightbringer, the Outsider, or the Burning One, who all gain power through devouring their kin. Interestingly enough, it appears the Void Dragon didn't even need an amp from an ascendant form, as the Codex statement implying the Void Dragon was the strongest appears to refer to the era around the shattering of the Catan, an event that occurs after the star gods began consuming one another. That means even after those massive power boosts from devouring their siblings, the Void Dragon was still considered the strongest Catan. In other words, there is no external amp required for the Void Dragon to reach the top spot among the star gods. Apparently he's just, built different or something. As for his unique powers and abilities, the Void Dragon is the most technologically attuned of the Catan, possessing absolute dominion over matter and technology. Its powers are so vast that it can unmake war engines with a gesture, and is even believed to be the origin of the machine spirit worshipped by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Someone fact check me if I'm right about that, because I may be lying out of my cow butt. Furthermore, according to Eldar legend, the Void Dragon can create invincible warriors. These warriors were able to channel lightning into their enemies, attacks that were powerful enough to destroy even the Eldar warriors. According to the same legends, Vol had to craft Iron Knights, what we now recognize as Wraith Lords, in order to effectively combat these invincible warriors and give the Eldar a fighting chance against them. The Void Dragon was also responsible for creating much of the Necron technological arsenal, including the Necron pylons. These pylons possess the ability to cut off and nullify the warp, suppressing psychic phenomena and even limiting the influence of warp entities such as the Chaos Gods. Because the Void Dragon created or heavily influenced this technology, that logically implies that the Void Dragon possesses some degree of inherent resistance or control over warp-related forces. Now we get to the Void Dragon's actual feats. One of the most important comes from the 9th edition Necron Codex, where the Void Dragon fought several Talisman of Vol. I say several because we absolutely have no idea how many of these weapons were actually used against him. The Discord and I tried for several long hours to figure out how many actually fought the Void Dragon, but we really hit a stalemate and I decided to throw my hands in the air and guesstimate. The number could be anywhere from 6 to 12, which is still insane as these weapons are absolutely ridiculous in terms of destructive potential. Destroyers of stars and planets, they become exponentially stronger when linked together, with their warp-fueled weapon systems combining to produce devastating levels of destruction. So imagine what 6 to 12 of these weapons firing together could potentially do. Additionally, it appears Vol specifically designed these weapons to fight the Void Dragon and the other Catan. That means the Talisman of Vol were essentially purpose-built anti-Catan super weapons. And although we don't know the exact details of how the fight played out, the 9th edition Necron Codex implies that the Void Dragon actually survived this assault, though the battle revealed a weakness that the Necrons later exploited when they captured and shattered him. Yet about Maglodrov's neck had hung the Talisman of Vol, and by the light that spilled from it within, had a secret weakness been revealed. So the Void Dragon was able to withstand anywhere from 6 to 12 Blackstone fortresses specifically designed to destroy him and still managed to escape the battle. Unfortunately for myself and all of you watching, that is the only uncharted Void Dragon feat we really have to work with. But we also have 2 feats from the shards of the Void Dragon that massively upscale what the full entity should be able to do. First, from the 7th edition Necron Codex, a shard of the Void Dragon escapes from its imprisonment, laying waste to the Arotep dynasty in its mindless rage. Though only a faint shadow of a true Catan, the Void Dragon gorges itself on a dozen worlds, expending its fury upon the living before the Arotep Cryptex can finally force it back into its cage. So as you can see here, even a tiny fragment, a mere shard of the Void Dragon, can destroy multiple worlds before it can finally be contained. Secondly, in Mechanicum, the Void Dragon actually fights the Emperor of Mankind. Now I will admit this is the Emperor before he receives his massive power boost at Molech, but still, this is the Emperor of Mankind, and the Void Dragon is only a shard. The dragon towered over its foe, dealing him fearful blows. But the knight caught them upon his shield and thrust his sword against the dragon's belly. The scales of the beast were like steel plates, rippling like liquid mercury as they withstood the knight's every attack. Then the dragon, infuriated by the thrust, lashed itself against the knight and his horse and cast lightning upon him from its eyes. The dragon looped itself around the knight, clawing and biting at its armor and roaring in triumph. Then, as though the thought had come from the warrior, Delilah saw that no matter how the dragon writhed, it sought always to protect one place in its body, a place beneath its left wing. "Strike, warrior, strike," she urged. As if hearing her words, the knight bent downwards and lunged forward, thrusting his sword with a mighty bellow into the dragon's body. The creature gave out a deafening roar that shook stones from the city walls, and the burning radius in its breast was extinguished. Its grasp upon the knight loosened, and the lightning faded from its eyes as the great beast fell to the ground. Perceiving that the dragon was helpless, though not dead, the knight untied the long white banner from his shattered lance and bound it around the neck of the monster. Overall, this fight appears to be somewhere between a low to mid-diff encounter for the Emperor, but yet again, it's important to remember two things. This is the Emperor, and this is still only a shard of a Catan. So when we summarize the Void Dragon scaling, it becomes pretty clear why he lands so high on this list. We have multiple codex statements outright calling him the strongest of the Catan. We have evidence that he survived an assault from an absurd number of Talisman of Vol, planet and star-destroying superweapons that are designed to specifically kill him. And we have feats from the shards of the Void Dragon destroying multiple worlds and fighting the Emperor. When you combine all these statements and feats together, the scaling for the full unshattered Void Dragon becomes quite clear. And that is exactly why the Void Dragon, my favorite cosmic void Buki, comes in at number 3 on this great, undisputable, fabulous list.
You're goddamn right.
Coming in at number 2 is Tzeentch. That is Tzeentch in his prime. Oh my god, who could have seen that coming? It's only like I mentioned him like 3 times throughout this video. But finally, we reach him. Tzeentch is a god of chaos who represents the vitality and the volatility of change. He is closely associated with sorcery and magic, as well as the dynamic mutation and grand convoluted scheming. The domains of history, destiny, intrigue, and plots are his chief interests, and in pursuit of these aspects, he's listened to the dreams and hopes of all beings and watches their plans take form. Like the other Chaos Gods discussed earlier, Slaanesh, Nurgle, and Khorne, Tzeentch possesses the same fundamental divine abilities. As a Chaos God, he is an entity born from and sustained by the Warp, meaning he exists as a vast metaphysical intelligence that transcends conventional physical limits. He can reshape reality within the Warp, create and command legions of demons, manipulate mortal civilizations across the galaxy through subtle influence, and alter the fate of entire star systems through his schemes. In addition to these shared divine traits, Tzeentch possesses abilities that make him uniquely terrifying amongst the Chaos Pantheon. He can mutate anything or anyone simply for his own amusement, reshaping flesh, mind, and soul with a thought. He can manipulate time and space, bending causality, gravity, and probability within his domain. His realm in the Warp is arguably the most dangerous and disorienting of all the Chaos realms, as it's an ever-changing labyrinth of impossible architecture, living spells, and shifting realities that represent madness given physical form. And now, my beloved herd, it's finally time to discuss the infamous event that has been brought up so many times in this video that it seems like I'm beating a dead cow. But we're gonna go over it one last time. Before we continue, it's worth mentioning that there are several interpretations of what actually happened in this fight. In some accounts, it appears that Tzeentch surrendered because he believed he would lose. Other interpretations suggest Tzeentch purposely allowed himself to be defeated in order to further the great game. And in some versions, he simply loses. There are also several different ways the battle itself is described, but for this discussion, we'll be using the most common interpretation from the Blue Scribes in the 7th edition Chaos Demons Codex. Here is the full excerpt. There was a time when Tzeentch ruled supreme over the Warp, his powers vastly superior to those of any of his brothers. In their envy and arrogance, the other Dark Gods set aside their differences and joined forces to overthrow the Architect of Fate. Territories too vast and maddening to comprehend were devastated in the cataclysmic conflict that followed. During the final battle, with defeat seeming inevitable, Tzeentch cast a great conjuration upon himself, crystallizing his thoughts and body, even as he was lifted up from his perch and hurled against the endless mountains. Upon impact, his mighty form was shattered into 10,000 pieces. So yeah, Tzeentch lost, but the important part is that 3 Chaos Gods, Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, were forced to set aside their rivalries and unite against him due to his power. That alone is an enormous scaling statement. That literally means that Prime Tzeentch is the most powerful Chaos God that has ever existed in 40K. Even more interesting than that is the fact that after he lost, the Codex states afterwards that Tzeentch will undoubtedly regain supremacy in the great game and once more rule over all creation. I mean, how else am I supposed to interpret that besides Tzeentch is the top dog? Prime Tzeentch is simply that guy. And I bet you're probably wondering who is number 1. Well, let me give you 2 hints. This pick is probably going to piss off half of you, and the other hint is that he's a king. I bet you already know who it is. Enough teasing, let's move on to the strongest character in all of 40K.
Drum roll, please. That's your drum roll.
When a tempo isn't specified, any reasonable person would default to lento.
Yep, I assume you guessed it. The Dark King is the #1 strongest character in 40K. And I know, this means there are 3 variations of the Emperor on this list. But what do you guys want me to do? These are all different versions of the Emperor of Mankind, from different time periods with different abilities and levels of power. Rolling them all into one would be a complete waste, and honestly there would be no point in doing this video at all if I simply put the Emperor at #1 without breaking down his various forms. So I had no choice but to put the Dark King here. For those who don't know who the heck the Dark King is, he is the theoretical 5th Chaos God, who has been prophesized by both humans and the Eldar throughout history. However, the first time we actually see this concept explored is in the book trilogy, The End and the Death. And ironically, that trilogy is the only place the Dark King ever appears in the entire setting. Yeah, I'm literally not joking. And it may remain like that forever. Because if this entity ever actually emerged fully, the entire universe would be destroyed. And that's not a hyperbole. The Dark King is the Lord of Ruin, representing the supreme embodiment of total indiscriminate destruction and the annihilation of all things. Pretty much the end and the death. This occurs when the Emperor prepares to confront Horus Lupercal, who has become unbelievably powerful through his connection to the warp and the favor of all 4 Chaos Gods. In order to face Horus, the Emperor begins drawing on the warp to an unprecedented degree. In fact, he starts drawing too deeply, absorbing so much power that he starts ascending into something far beyond what he once was. All of the following excerpts come from just 2 books, The End and the Death Part 1 and Part 2, because by Part 3, the Dark King threat is ultimately averted. Yes, it sounds stupid, but 2 books are more than enough to put this character as the strongest in 40K. First, we see the Emperor has drunk too deeply of the warp. The warp, he is drunk of the warp. He is drawn in its power to fight chaos, but he has drunk too much and too deeply. It has made him thus. It has made him the very thing he resolved to stop. This is observed from Malcador the Sigillite's point of view as he sits upon the Golden Throne, who is at a point where he can observe truly everything occurring around Terra and possibly the entire galaxy. This is him seeing the Emperor as he begins to ascend. My king undone. Not by his first found's rage, nor by the calamity of traitors, nor even the spite of demons. He is undone by his own hand. He has been obliged to draw on the warp surrounding him. At every step, he has glutted himself on its power. This I saw him do, before he became too bright to behold. It was a wondrous skill, the highest form of the Psyker's craft. No one else could do it. He turned the warp back on chaos, empowering himself and his stalwart companions, for without strength, he would have been overwhelmed and snuffed out. Now, as his light dims for a moment, I see what this has done to him. He is scarcely recognizable. His senses, perception, and capabilities are fast exceeding those mighty gifts he possessed of old, even the utmost potential of them. This Atelagi will dwarf them, ascending a whole new scale of ability. What he's becoming now will make the master of mankind seem like a mere mortal. He's becoming a thing of absolutes. No shred of humanity, nor even perpetuality, will remain when the process is complete. He will be ascendant. So yeah, at this moment, the Emperor is on the verge of godhood, transforming within the vengeful spirit into a god of ruin. Malcador then remarks, the Dark King, about to be born, has gorged on power, but that surfeit merely makes his hunger grow. He will feed until the galaxy grows cold and nothing remains except the dark husks of stars that once shone as brightly as him. While we held firm and faced down the greatest threat to human life, another greater threat arose behind our backs. I see what he is becoming, I see what he will become. No power in creation can stand in opposition or prevent it. confirmation from Malkador, who's on the Golden Throne, who should be nearly omnipotent at this point, says the Dark King is beyond anything in creation. Moments after this, a human psyker, Actea, also observes his transformation. She can see the Dark King. He is here now and upon the world. It is impossible not to see him, even with a mind as damaged and blinded as hers, for his consuming darkness is as bright and ferocious as a black star. He is everywhere and everything, fusing and burning everything around him with the scorching radius of his power. Such a thing. In her wildest visions, she could have never imagined such a creature. The universe is not big enough to contain him, the cardinal powers of chaos are but ghosts in his shadow, and the almighty warp obeys his voice, helpless in his tidal pull. Terrible, beautiful, inconceivable, unimaginable. The Dark King is here and every atom of the universe will be changed. This is the true potential of the Dark King. He is all-consuming, everywhere and everything, merging with reality itself as he is born. The universe is described as being too small to contain him, while the Chaos Gods, the rulers of the warp in the current setting, are described as mere ghosts in his shadow. Even more absurdly, the warp would obey him. That statement alone implies power greater than the warp and the Chaos Gods. Finally, we see that every atom in the material universe will be changed, implying that the Dark King would have control over every single particle in real space. If he can command both the warp and the materium simultaneously, then he effectively controls all of existence. Eventually, Alanis Pearson, one of my favorite characters in the entire 40K series, so me, convinces the Emperor to surrender this power. And we get this final moment as the Dark King vanishes from reality. The substance of creation shudders. Materia and immateria vibrate in shock. The electrons spinning around the protonic nuclei of every atom in the real space universe stutter and briefly cease to obey their mysterious quantum obligations. The power of the Dark King is expelled and scattered, pouring back into the Inferium from whence it came. Carrying with it Float Sam and Jet Sam, the broken prophecies and driftwood predictions that brought it hence. The never-born wail and mass, their whispers turned in on themselves. Twisted back into lies and cackled falsehoods, their future so assured, suddenly untruth. The Malsun of the Dark King passes from the material universe and back into the simmering chaos of myth. Just wow, guys. So to summarize the Dark King's power, he would become a chaos god of absolute ruin, whose influence extended across both the warp and the material universe at the same time. His emergence would have warped reality, altered every atom in existence, and placed him vastly above the chaos gods, whose power normally dominates the warp. Like straight up guys, you can argue Khorne, Tzeentch, or even the Void Dragon are stronger, but no one has feats or statements on this level. No one has statements about controlling every atom in real space and the warp as well. There is no argument in 40K at all that the Dark King is not the strongest character in the entire verse. Before we finish though, I want to briefly talk about whether we will ever actually see the Dark King appear in this setting again. And the answer is honestly rather confusing. The end and the death does hint that when the Dark King vanishes, he passes away for this age at least, which suggests he may be destined to return eventually. This idea is somewhat supported by the existence of ruin-associated entities like Samus during the Horus Heresy. But on the other hand, the book also makes it clear that the Emperor has to actively choose to become the Dark King. He did not fully realize the implications until Alanis Pearson forced him to stop and think for a moment. At that point, the Emperor understood the trap Chaos had set for him. He knew he was corruptible, and because of that, it's extremely unlikely he would willingly choose to become the Dark King again. Could that Chaos power be born simply from the Emperor's death? Maybe. Perhaps his soul would only be the first sacrifice to feed the birth of a new god. We are told that his death could lead to the destruction of humanity, and possibly even the galaxy. Will we ever actually see the Dark King appear? The answer is a big fat maybe. And now, let's recap the top 15 most powerful characters in 40K. After going through all the lore, scaling the feats, and digging through many codex statements, this is my list. We have the Dark King at number 1, Tzeentch in his prime at number 2, the Void Dragon at 3, Khorne in his prime at 4, 5 is Khaine at his prime with the Endorsed blade, 6 is Ynede after being born, 7 is the Ascendant Nightbringer, 8 is Slaanesh at the time of her birth, glutted on the power of billions of Eldar souls and the entire Eldar pantheon. 9 is the Emperor of Mankind upon the Golden Throne in the current setting. 10 is Asuryan, the chief of the Eldar gods at his prime. 11 is Vol with the Anarist sword buff. 12 is Nurgle. 13 is the Ascendant Outsider. 14 is the Ascendant Burning One. And at 15, we have the trio Deadlock, the Silent King Zarek, God Emperor Horus, and Big E in 30K. Please, if you guys have not already subscribed or liked this video, do it right now. So much research and thinking went into this video that I would greatly appreciate some love from my beloved herd. My motherboard also failed while editing this video, and I had to redo a good portion of the audio because I stupidly did not save, because who would ever think their motherboard would fail while editing? That was a lesson learned for your favorite fallen cow. Truly, I think this list is as close as we can get to a real answer based on the lore we currently have. Of course, you can absolutely argue some placements differently. This is Warhammer power scaling after all, nothing makes fucking sense. But based on the feats, statements, and scaling, this is what I believe the true top 15 looks like. Before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube and Patreon members, Tyler Pick 7, Cunning Karkal, Lag, Seth Capazilla, Keydree, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, Musty, and Impossible Paul. Your support means a lot to me, fellas, and it helps keep the channel going. And one more thing before we wrap this video up. The most powerful Space Marine video is finally coming in about 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how much I want to push my little cow brain. So stay tuned for that. And as always, my beloved herd, stay milked, and I will see you all very, very soon.